Welcome to this video on the conclusion of Act 3 of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. I'm going to cover Scene 4 and Scene 5 in this video. So I want to start with giving you a bit of context and reminding you of what has happened previously in Act 3 so that we are on the right page. So Act 3, Scene 1 is the fight scene where the unfortunate events happen between Mercutio and Tybalt, ending in their two demises and in Romeo's banishment by the prince. In scene 2, Juliet eventually hears the news from the nurse that Romeo has been banished and that Tybalt has been killed, and she storms off to Friar Lawrence, or rather, she sends the nurse off to Friar Lawrence to summon Romeo. And then finally, the last scene that we just read is in Friar Lawrence's cell, where Romeo hears about the banishment from Friar Lawrence, and then the nurse comes in and says that Juliet is still waiting for you. And both the nurse and Friar Lawrence chastise Romeo for being womanish and acting like a young girl, in that he's crying on the floor rather than acting like a man. And in the end of the scene, Friar Lawrence instructs Romeo to go to Juliet tonight, have your wedding night, and then tomorrow morning, before the sun rises, get you to Mantua and stay there until I've sorted this out and got a plan for your continued existence together. So in scene 4, Paris comes back to the House of Capulet to once again propose to Juliet. And I think it's worth that you have a look back at Act 1, Scene 2, lines 8 to 11, and how Lord Capulet responds to the first proposal by Paris, or the first one that we get to partake of at least, which supposedly happened only 2 days ago, where he was adamant that Juliet was too young because she has not yet seen her 14th year through, and he was determined that she was not to be married unless Paris could seduce her at the party, which of course he did not because they barely saw each other at the party. But in this scene, having now gone through the tragedy of Tybalt's dying and then seeing how traumatized Juliet is by that, or what he perceives to be trauma to her, he is now a changed man and he's ready to accept Paris, and not only accept him, but to hurry the wedding on so that they are only going to get married. They're going to get married in 3 days' time. So today's Monday, they're getting married on Thursday. The other thing that's interesting in this scene is the power play between Juliet and her father, and how he's certain at this point that she will accept him as her lord and master. And if he says you're going to get married to Paris, then that is certainly going to happen. So to that effect, he says, "So Paris, I will make a desperate tender of my child's love. I think she will be ruled in all respects by me. Nay, more, I doubt it not." So there's the certainty that we talked about. And then he starts thinking about a date for the wedding. Today is Monday, so Wednesday will be a bit too soon because, after all, Tybalt just died yesterday. So let's not do Wednesday. Let's say on Thursday, let it be. On Thursday, tell her she shall be married to this noble earl. We then move on to scene 5, which is a very emotive scene because it has several twists to it. It is the morning after the consummation of the marriage, not consumption. So they wake up after the wedding night, and it starts with the two lovers separating, the last time they really speak to each other in life. And then Juliet's mother comes, soon as Romeo departs, Juliet's mother comes in to tell her the happy news that she's about to get married to Paris on Thursday, which of course is not well received by Juliet. So she tells her mother and then tells her father that she is not getting married to Paris, and then she storms off to Friar Lawrence for some further advice. So this first scene brings back two motifs that we've been familiar with before. We have the birds yet again, and here we have two birds actually. On the one hand, we have the nightingale, which is the bird that sings at night and kind of keeps night at keep going on essentially. And then we have the lark, which is the morning bird, the bird that tends to greet dawn and sing in the mornings. And then we have light, a representative of the sun, but it's really about the light as a whole. And up to this point in the play, light has been a positive image. Even if the two lovers meet in darkness, they've still been each other's light in the dark, and they've carried torches with light, etc. But here, light becomes essentially the enemy, because with the coming of the light, Romeo has to depart, and of course there's a risk of him being found, etc. So the light becomes a negative motif in this scene. So when we start the scene, Juliet is saying, "What are you leaving already? Wilt thou be gone? It is not the very day. It was the nightingale and not the lark." So that we could hear through the window. He often sits over in that pomegranate tree and sings for us at night. But Romeo is more of a realist. So he's saying, no, it was the lark, the herald of the morn. No nightingale. And he points out that night's candles are burnt out, so that um, the candles that were burning are now, night is over, and I must be gone and live or stay and die. But Juliet say, no, no, it's not the light. Yon light, the light over there, is not daylight. I know it. It is some meteor that the sun has exhaled to be to thee this night a torch bearer, and light thee on thy way to Mantua. So here the sun, he imagines the sun is trying to help Romeo on his way to Mantua, make sure that he stays safe and finds his way safely. So please stay a bit longer. You don't need to be gone yet. And Romeo is so in love that he's going to agree to anything that Juliet says. So he says, let me be taken, let me be put to death. I am content, so thou wilt have it so. I'll say that yon grey light is not the morning's eye, but it's only a pale reflex of Cynthia's brow. So the night is still, it's on that. It was not the lark we heard, and I have no more care to stay than will to do. So I'm going to stay around. It's okay. Come, death, and welcome, Juliet wills it so. So he personifies death and says, come here. It's okay. I'll die here if Juliet wants me to be dead today. But then Juliet comes to her senses and says, no, 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 that's right. You're right. It is the sun. It is the lark. High hence be gone away. It is the lark that sings. So then she finally sends him out on his way. And then we had that reference that I mentioned before, how the light now becomes something negative. More light and light, more dark and dark are woes. So yes, there's more light coming, but our future and our problems are getting darker and darker and more problematic. And then we get to the parting of the lovers, and with Juliet has a very dark, sort of prophetic insight here. It becomes for us, it obviously becomes foreshadowing of what is to come. Because she asked Romeo, "Do you think we'll ever see each other again?" And he says, "I doubt it not. All these woes shall serve for sweet discourse in our times to come." We'll chat about this later when we sit over dinner in some future life. But she still holds on to this negative feeling. "Oh God, I have an ill divining soul. Methinks I see thee now. Thou art so low as one dead in the bottom of a tomb." So presumably he is literally now below her balcony, so she's looking down at him. So she does see him far below her. But obviously for us, this also becomes a foreshadowing of later on. She will be looking down on his dead body on the floor of the Capulet family tomb. And she concludes that speech by saying that he looks pale. Either my eyesight fails or thou lookst pale. And Romeo looks back up at her and says, "In my eye, so do you. Dry sorrow drinks our blood. Adieu, adieu." So he ends on that couplet, and that, of course, becomes his last words to her. Um, and then we get an echo again of the prologue and the references we've seen before to fate and to fortune, and where Juliet says that fortune is often seen as fickle. And if thou art fickle, what does thou? Why are you dealing with him, Romeo, that is renowned for faith? He's reliable, he's steadfast. So why is fickle fate trying to interfere with his life? And then in comes Lady Capulet, and she's asking Juliet about her state of mind and why are you still weeping for your cousin's death? And she hyperbolically says that if you keep crying, you're going to wash him from his grave with your tears, right? You're going to create a river, and that river is going to flood poor Tybalt out of his grave. It's okay to have some grief that shows that you're loving someone, but too much grief shows that you are lacking in intelligence. So you've got to stop crying now and get over this grief. Then we come to an interesting passage where Juliet outsmarts her mother in a play of words. Lady Capulet says, I understand that you're in grief and in mourning because that villain lives which slaughtered Tybalt. And Juliet asks, what villain? That same villain Romeo. And Juliet, in an aside to us, tells us the villain and he may be many miles asunder. They couldn't be further from each other. Right? He's certainly not a villain. God pardon him, I do with all my heart, and yet no man like he doth grieve my heart. Which to her mother, of course, sounds like Romeo has created a great. Well, he has. She does say that Romeo has created a great grievance for me. I'm really sad about what Romeo has done, but not the killing of Tybalt, but rather the climbing down from my balcony and leaving me. That's what's made me sad. And her mother continues, yes, that's because the traitor murderer lives. And she agrees, yes, I, madam, from the reach of these my hands, which of course she refers to as I want to embrace him. I hope that none but I might venge my cousin's death. And then Lady Capulet comes up with an idea of, I'm going to send someone to Mantua with a poison to take care of Romeo. And Juliet says, yes, indeed, I never shall be satisfied with Romeo until I behold him. Dead is my poor heart, for my kinsman vexed. And her mother, of course, thinks she wants to behold him dead, but she's saying she wants to behold him, and her heart is dead until he rejoins her, right? So she's kind of clever here, how she can not betray Romeo and at the same time sound like she is being faithful to her mother. And then Lady Capulet moves on to giving her the great news. But now I'll tell the joyful tidings, girl. And Juliet kind of gets excited. So what is this? What is this joy that you're bringing me? But that quickly, of course, turns to something completely different because she says, Marry, my child, early next Thursday morn, the gallant young and noble gentleman, the County Paris, at St. Peter's Church, shall happily make thee there a joyful bride. And Juliet, of course, is shocked at this and says to her mother, No, I'm certainly not going to be a joyful bride in St. Peter's Church on Thursday. I can't understand this haste that I must wed before I've even met the man who supposedly is coming to woo me. I'm not going to marry him. I'd sooner marry Romeo, who you know that I hate, rather than Paris. These are news indeed. And Lady Capulet is a bit shocked and says, Well, here comes your father. You talk to him instead. So Lord Capulet is at this point cheerful because he's just secured a marriage for his daughter, and he comes in and he sees her still in tears, and he brings up a bit more maritime imagery. We saw some references back in Act 1, Scene 4 to Romeo describing his life as a boat driven by fate. And here, Lord Capulet is talking about Juliet's body being a boat in a sea of tears, because she's been crying for so long now that she's now standing in a salty flood, and the winds from her sighs are making the waters rage around her. And so he sees that her body is being tossed by the storms of the sea. So he's a bit surprised and says, "What, haven't you told her about our decree yet?" And Lady Capulet says, "Aye, sir, she will none. She gives you thanks, and would the fool were married to her grave." Sorry, I would the fool were married to her grave, which obviously becomes a big da 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 moment because we know that very soon Juliet will be married to her grave. And so I'm sure Lady Capulet will think of these words many times in her future life. and regret these hasty words. Lord Capulet reacts violently to this news, of course, that he was expecting his daughter to be thankful and appreciative of the fact that he has secured such a great catch for her. So he's kind of stuck for words. He can't even express his anger here at Juliet. But eventually he says, "Get yourselves ready and fettle your joints against Thursday next to go with Paris to St. Peter's Church, or I will drag thee on a hurdle thither." And then he uses various expletives to tell Juliet how little he likes her at the moment. But even to the point where when he calls her out, "You green sickness carrying, out you baggage, you tallow face," even Lady Capulet thinks that, "May, calm down, mate. You have gone too far. It's your daughter you're talking to here, so you need to settle down." But he's not going to hear a word from his wife or from Juliet, who's trying to beseech him as well. So instead, he says, "Get thee to church on Thursday, or never after look me in the face. Speak not, reply not, do not answer me. My fingers itch, I want to hit you. Wife, we scarce thought us blessed that we had such a daughter, that we only had one child. But now I see this one is one too much, and that we have a curse in having her. Out on her, Hilding." And here even the nurse steps in for Juliet and says, "God in heaven bless her, you are to blame, my lord, to rate her so." And then Juliet gets to end this little exchange. The father has already stormed off, but before her mother leaves, Juliet says to her, "Oh, sweet my mother, cast me not away. Delay this marriage for a month, a week, or if you do not, make the bridal bed in that dim monument where Tybalt lies." Which again for us is a heavy foreshadowing, of course, given the plan that Friar Lawrence is about to present at the start of Act 4. So when her mother leaves, Juliet finally pleads with the nurse. "Nurse, how shall this be prevented? My husband is on earth, my faith in heaven, because I can't have two husbands. That will be in breach of the decree of the church, right? God would not like me to have a second husband. So I need to sort this out. And my husband is still on earth. My husband is still alive. So I need another plan here. Comfort me, counsel me. Alack, alack, that heaven should practice stratagems upon so soft a subject as myself. What sayest thou? Hast thou not a word of joy, some comfort, nurse?" But unfortunately, the nurse is not really supportive of Juliet coming up with a different plan. Her plan instead is, "Romeo is banished, and all the world to nothing, that he dares ne'er come back to challenge you, or if he do, it needs be by stealth. So because that's the situation, because Romeo's away, best you marry with the county, so with Paris. He's such a lovely gentleman. An eagle, madam, hath not so green, so quick, so fair an eye as Paris hath. So she, you know, you're happy in this second match, for it excels your first. You're much better off marrying Paris than marrying Romeo." And Juliet is aghast at these words, right? "Speakst thou from thy heart? I thought you were on my side, but clearly you're not." So then the nurse leaves, and Juliet is left on stage for a very small soliloquy, where essentially she declares that, it seems like everything else has deserted me, so the only option I now have left is to go to Friar Lawrence and see if he has a remedy, and if it doesn't, then I am at least resolved enough to die by my own hand and thereby take care of this problem. And as she exits the stage to leave for Friar Lawrence, that concludes Act 3, which will resume again at Friar Lawrence's in the next scene.